And we're off and running on a Friday. Stream number 2, Chase Sr. in the house, 10:45 on the West Coast, 1:45 on the East Coast. Hope everybody's having a great day. April the 12th, we're brought to you by Pig and a Pickle, the best barbecue in all of Northern California. Check them out in Emeryville and Corte Madera. They're open 7 days a week from 11 a.m. till 8 p.m. or until they run out. We're also brought to you by Marin Auto Glass. Check them out at marinautoglass.com. Underdog Fantasy, check the link in the description. Use that promo code Krug, and they'll match you up to your first $100. And then, of course, our good friends at Sharp Corners, Sports Cards and Collectibles in Monterey. Great sports card place, great sports collectible spot. Give Anthony Catania a call. He's at 831-521-5264. What's going on, Chase? How are you, man?
Having a great Friday, technically off today, but always love this spot, hooking up with you every single Friday, talking some Niners and just taking this day to get some stuff done, get a little workout in later, watch the Masters, sit down, watch some baseball. NBA is starting to heat up now toward the end of the regular season because I cover the NBA as well here at Chat Sports. So all is good as on my end as we approach the NFL draft, which is going to be always a great time of year.
Well, we titled this, Tom Brady is not opposed to a return with the 49ers. What is Tom Brady thinking? I mean, is this just like, hey, you know what? Let's, I like the attention. I mean, he's 46 or 40 going on 47. And come on. I mean, it's over, right? Don't tell me Tom Brady's coming back.
I just think these athletes have such a difficult time of officially walking away, especially an athlete like Tom Brady, who has always prioritized putting a lot of money, time, resources, investments into staying in shape. I read his TB12 book, and I thought it was fascinating how he goes about his daily life. He's all about longevity, looking to live a long, prosperous, healthy life. And we saw that in his NFL career. It was incredible how at 44, 45 years old, he was defying father time, kind of like what LeBron James is doing right now as he's closing in on 40 years old, and both of them still playing at an elite level. And I think about it from an athlete standpoint, especially for a competitor like Tom Brady, who loves the craft, loves getting in the lab, loves the daily process, loves the chase for greatness, where you're on that grind every single day. And that is your motivation when you wake up until the time you go to sleep. And it's all about perfecting your craft, getting better. And then when you're sleeping, it's all about recovery. You're always thinking about ways to hone in on how you can maximize your fullest potential. So you go from that for Tom Brady 2+ decades, and then now you just don't have to do that any longer because you're no longer a professional athlete. You're no longer a quarterback. And obviously what we do is a lot different. But even when I'm off, I'm still itching. I'm still excited to hop on this mic and talk with you and talk some football here. Even when I'm off, I'm still wanting to do social media content. I want to get my thoughts and opinions out there because I just love the process. I love the grind. But come on, Tom Brady, you're going to be 47 years old. And now you're saying, if a team calls, I might want to come back. And it's definitely not the Brett Favre level where he retired, came back, always drama. And it got kind of annoying after a little while. But it is kind of hilarious how Tom Brady is back in the news here.
You know, one of the stories of the draft approaching is that the Niners might surprise and try to move up for an offensive tackle. I mean, if they're moving up for an offensive tackle, which offensive tackle should they be moving up to draft in your mind?
If they're moving up to take an offensive tackle, I think you have to target a tackle who is a freakish athlete, has a lot of upside, and might not be a refined product right now, but in 2-3 years, you're looking at that player as being a perennial Pro Bowler at some point, an all-pro level player, and maybe taking over for Trent Williams once he decides to retire because he's starting to enter whole 15, 16, 17 of his career. If you want to use a golf reference, now that the Masters is going on, he's at the tail end of his career, right? So I think if you're moving up, you're looking at a player like Amarius Mims. You're looking at a player like Tyler Guyton. You're looking at a prospect like Troy Fuatano or Thales Fuanga, who you think is going to be a legitimate player for the next 10 years because you're investing the resources into trading up for that player. and you want to know that they're going to be a sure thing, or they have this really high ceiling where they can become that Trent Williams level player in the future.
All this talk about trading up for a tackle in a deep tackle draft, I don't know that I would be an advocate for that. I mean, just because I think that Mims hasn't played. I think Fatanu probably is the guy who's ready to play the most. I love J.C. Latham, but I've had buddies who in the scouting community who have called me and said, Krug, pump the brakes. That guy's a guard. And I'm like, really? I mean, he's listed as a tackle. He played right tackle at Bama. He's 6'6", about 350 pounds. There's some people that love the kid Fashanu out of Penn State. At the beginning of the year, he was maybe the highest rated tackle right there with all. It looks like he's slid a little bit. What do you think of Fashanu? You're a PA guy. He's got all the measurables you want. At the beginning of the year, he was the preseason All-American. He was the guy early in the year that people thought was going top 10. Is he still going top 10?
Yeah, if he came out last year for the 2023 draft, there was talk about him being a top 10 pick last year. So he goes back to school and he wants to get a little bit stronger. He wants to improve his skill set a little bit as an offensive lineman. And I still think he's worthy of being probably a top 15 pick. I think in the Big Ten, think about where all those schools are pretty much located, or at least were, because now they're extending out to the Pacific Northwest and out west because of the conference realignment and the conference expansion. But for so long, the Big Ten has been strictly in the Midwestern portion of the country. You're going up against a lot of country boys, a lot of farm boys, a lot of beefy offensive linemen and defensive linemen. So for Olu Fashanu, he's going up against some really good edge rushers across the Big Ten, players who are getting drafted in the first, second, third rounds, who have been highly productive players, highly touted recruits coming out of high school. I thought he held up well in that competition, and I still think that he's going to be a good player in this league. When I saw him at the NFL Scouting Combine and when I interviewed some of these offensive linemen, some of them really stood out as far as the body type. You look at the Joe Alts, you look at the Graham Bartons, Olu Fashanu, Amarius Mims, some of these freak athletes, they're so big up top with these broad shoulders and huge upper body frames. And then they're really kind of slender in the waist with powerful legs. And a scouting kind of verbiage is they don't have a lot of bad weight. Olu Fashanu doesn't have a lot of bad weight. Whereas when I did see Thales Fuanga, he does have some bad weight where he looks a little bit chunky. He's a little bit round. He's a little bit plump. That's not the case with Olu Fashanu. And if we're talking about the Niners trading up for an offensive lineman, by the way, it's completely not possible because he's the best offensive tackle in this class, I think, by a long shot. The best player to trade up for would be Joe Alt. But the Niners can't move realistically from 31 all the way inside the top 10 because you'll just have to give away way too many draft resources.
Well, it's funny. If they're going to have any kind of monumental jump in the first round, it's probably going to take Aiyuk and picks.
Yeah.
You'd have to move your 30. What would the Niners get if they moved Aiyuk and 31? And I mentioned this because I'm just watching First Take this morning, and they're going through the teams that need quarterback or need wide receivers. And they didn't even mention Pittsburgh, but obviously Buffalo has a severe need. They picked 28th with no Diggs. Their receiving core doesn't look very good. The New York Giants, just because it's New York, they're looking for a wide receiver. Kansas City's clearly looking for a wide receiver. Maybe Jacksonville, definitely the Chargers, maybe the Browns. I guess I would ask you the question is how, if the Niners wanted to really move up for a big time guy, let's say they were in love with Malik Neighbors, could they move Aiyuk in 31 and get the Giants to bite?
I think the Giants are in a position where they really want to hold on to that pick because they know they're not going to be competitive, at least in 2024. And they want to get a high level impact player who's going to be able to move the needle for that football team for the foreseeable future. The team that I kind of look at is the Denver Broncos. They do not have a second round pick. They currently have the 12th overall pick. And if the Niners wanted to really trade up, And if they wanted to trade away Brandon Aiyuk, or if Aiyuk asked out, I think the only way that Aiyuk is not with the Niners is if he asked for like $30 million and he asked out of San Francisco. Denver Broncos don't have a number one wide receiver right now. And they want that young wideout to pair up with their future quarterback. Do you trade 12 away and you get Aiyuk, and then you get the 31st overall pick from San Francisco? And as I mentioned, the Denver Broncos don't have that second round pick, and then they're able to get a second rounder as well. That's kind of the range or the team that I would be looking at. And if you want a Malik Neighbors type of player, you can get him there. Or depending on how the board falls or which player you really covet, I think that would be a little bit of a reach for AD Mitchell, but it wouldn't surprise me if AD Mitchell is a top 2, top 3 wide receiver in this class. So that would kind of be the team or the territory that I would look at for San Francisco to move up if they were to trade away Aiyuk and pair that with pick number 31 to get a wideout.
What do you make of this? I'm going to share the screen here. This is the latest RSF 49ers. My man Raj put this out. This is Brandon Ayuk's latest IG caption. To me, this has grown so tiresome.
Yep.
This cryptic bullshit on your IG, but people are taking this and running with it. It says basically what the goat in the house.
I think it's a dog. So
our
it's
dog in the house only plays for a big dog.
Yeah,
People were saying, the Browns want him. He wants to go to Cleveland. I mean, what is your, I'm 54. You're younger than me. Decipher the IG for me, please.
So the first one a few weeks ago was Money Talks Bullshit Walks. And I was able to decipher that right away. It's a rap lyric that's in multiple rap songs. I do like rap music. Meek Mill has said it from time to time. Money Talks Bullshit Walks was the first one. This one is the doghouse is the only place for a big dog. And we've just kind of seen this from professional athletes in all major sports over the last few years in these contract negotiations where it's all about leverage. You have agent-driven propaganda, you have team-driven propaganda, and then you have the player-driven propaganda as well. And it's all about leverage. It's all about pressuring the team into paying the player. It's all about getting the player to take the discount. It's all about the athlete trying to prove their worth and get the price tag that they believe that they're worthy of. And I'm of the belief, like, you are worth what somebody is willing to pay you. There's no doubt about that. But all the Deebo Samuel stuff of requesting the fake trade, he didn't want to get traded by the San Francisco 49ers. Thankfully, some of this stuff with Brandon Aiyuk isn't to the dramatic levels of a Deebo Samuel. But back in, 2020, George Kittle's agent was calling it the Valentine's Day Massacre. It's just all so hyperbolic. It's also tiresome. And then you have the athletes unfollowing the team on social media, and people make a big deal out of that on X, formerly known as Twitter. And it's just a constant cycle. A few years ago, we were buying into all of that because it hadn't been done before. Now, though, we know what this is all about. And I get if Aiyuk is in the gym and he's thinking about what he's done so far in his career. He was a JUCO guy. He went to Arizona State. The Niners took a chance on him with the 25th overall pick. Some people thought that was a little bit too high for Aiyuk and was a little bit bumpy year one, COVID year. He still played really well despite a lack of training camp practices and no preseason games. He missed some time. Year two, he was in the doghouse. But every single year that he's gotten better, his price tag has gone up and his value across the league has gone up. And he's really, truly developed into a complete wide receiver who's a great route runner, great footwork. He's a complete wide receiver who last year helped Brock Purdy have the number one deep ball completion rate in the entire NFL. I thought Purdy and Aiyuk helped unlock an element of Kyle Shanahan's offense that we haven't seen before because of that deep ball being a part of this offense, because Jimmy Garoppolo didn't have the accuracy, the anticipation, the touch, or the ability to really complete those passes. So Aiyuk has so much value. And I imagine some of this is reflection. He's looking at, I was a JUCO guy, went to Arizona State. Look how far I've come. I was in the doghouse, But you know what? The doghouse is the only place for the big dog. He is a big dog in this league. I just hope they get a deal done and they get it done quickly so that we don't have to keep talking about this drama, because it has gotten tiresome. And it's so funny. When you're in the position that you and I are, this is one of the biggest stories across the NFL. So we continue to cover every noteworthy Brandon Aiyuk story, but then the audience gets mad at us for talking about it when we're just doing our jobs and covering the story. I just want it to end. I want the contract to happen. Unfortunately, with how the Niners do business, a deal's probably not going to get done until late July, early August, because that's how the Niners historically have done business under this regime.
It's just the way it goes in the offseason. The NFL's king. There's only so many stories. Last year, at this point, I had people saying, Krug, stop it. You're killing me with your content. Trey Lance is not going anywhere. He's not going to be traded. Stop talking about it. You're wishing for it and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I'm not wishing for it. I'm reading tea leaves, and I was reading the tea leaves correctly. And He was dealt, and they did try to move him during the draft, and they just couldn't. And so that was a story. And yet people by, hundreds were in my chat. Stop talking. You're obsessing on this Trey Lance trade. They love him. They're not trading him. Well, that was a bunch of crap. They didn't love him. They were trading him. I was reading that correctly. The Aiyuk thing is interesting from the standpoint of, I know they love him. We all love him. But you're going to pay your quarterback 50 times what you're paying him in the not that distant future. And I don't know that you can afford him at his price. So I know they're talking. All the indications are he wants to be here. They want him, blah, 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 blah. But it's all about, how willing are both sides to make a deal. If the Niners aren't moving off their price and Aiyuk ain't moving off of his, or if his price is exorbitant in their eyes, they're moving him. So I don't think we're sitting here, discussing it is over. We're not just making up a story. Where do you think this ultimately is going to fall? Because I think Aiyuk badly wants to get paid. I think the wide receiver market is quickly moving out of their control. He wants to wait for it to move further out of their control. They're hoping to get him at some kind of a bargain deal. I don't know if I see that. Chase, this may be an impasse. And even though it makes no, they said they love him. They said they love Trey Lance until the minute they moved him. Now they really do love Aiyuk. I'm not saying, but there's no advantage if you're trying to trade an asset to devalue him in any way, shape, or form. So you're going to say, we love the player. We appreciate the player. We want the player. But you know what? They got a price, and they've got a walk-away price as well. How do you think this thing's going to end?
Yeah, and it's funny. I think you and I have two of the most watched, two of the largest 49ers channels on YouTube, because we do a good job of reading the tea leaves. And I think that that's a good skill to have as a broadcaster, or now the juicy word is content creator. You were talking about Trey Lance maybe getting traded. Why? Because the Niners' actions led us to believe that a trade could happen. They moved capital to move up to take him. Then they didn't give him chances. He got hurt. And last year he was getting third string quarterback reps, and they tried to move him during the draft. They didn't. So yeah, we believe that he might get dealt. And I had some of these fanboys all in my DMs on X saying, you hate Trey Lance.
Right.
You want him to get traded. He's not getting dealt. Look, covering the Niners has changed my life. I have a lot of pride and I have a lot of passion, and I take my job very seriously and talking about this team every single day. Part of that is knowing how the Niners operate as a business. I don't want him to get dealt, but I also am going to predict that he might get traded because of the Niners' actions. And he ended up getting traded. So you and I, we could take a victory lap on that. And that's why people come back to our channels, because we know ball. And sometimes the writing is on the wall. We predict it before other people do. And we talk about it weeks and months in advance. To Aiyuk here, think about the Niners' actions, right? They've invested so much time and resources into his development. I think they can take a victory lap for identifying him as a player with a lot of potential who they hit on with a 25th overall pick, again, as a JUCO player who went to Arizona State, and his numbers at Arizona State weren't crazy, but they were betting on upside. They were betting on improvement. They were betting on him ascending as a player. And this is also a Niners organization that has whiffed on a lot of first-round picks during this John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan regime. They hit on Brandon Aiyuk, and they foresaw him becoming a number one wide receiver. And I talked about some of the challenges that they had to overcome early in Aiyuk's career, with him being in the doghouse, him struggling, maybe not taking things as seriously, not blocking like Kyle Shanahan wants him to. But Kyle Shanahan was hard on Brandon Aiyuk because he thought he could be a great player. And what has happened? Kyle Shanahan being on his ass made Brandon Aiyuk realize this coaching staff cares about me. This organization cares about me. They see potential in me. It's time for me to tap into my potential. And you don't become a great route runner with excellent footwork and a complete wide receiver who has every single route to his route tree, is a goal line to goal line threat, can take the top off of the defense, who's explosive after the catch, who can make guys miss, who can drop DBs to their knees in the red zone, who becomes an all-pro if you don't work your ass off. Kyle Shanahan wanted Brandon Aiyuk to work his ass off. He has, and now he's become an all-pro player. So the Niners have put all of this time and investments and emotional energy into Brandon Aiyuk's development, hoping that he'd become a great player. Well, this past year, he became a great player. It would be stupid for them to just let him walk over some money. Now, here's the sticking point. If Justin Jefferson gets $32 million and CeeDee Lamb gets $30 million, does Brandon Aiyuk say, I think I'm as good as CeeDee Lamb, $30 million or no deal? And then Parag and John Lynch are like, whoa, we had budgeted $26 million. $30 million per year is a lot, especially when we're going to pay Brock Purdy 50 times what he's making, as you mentioned, and we're paying all these other players on this roster so much money. We want to give you a little bit less, but think about this. You said after the Super Bowl, you want to be with an organization that wins. You take a little bit less. We could put this roster together so that we can win. So I think the only way that Aiyuk is not with the Niners is two things. He asks out, or he asks for $30 million or a price that is too much money that the Niners are willing to give up, where then they look at it and saying, well, look at these drafts the last couple of years. Increasingly, with the increase in 7-on-7s and running backs wanting to play wide receiver because of longevity and financial reasons in the development of football, in the draft every year, these drafts are loaded with wide receivers. Can we trade him away? First round pick. We get in the 20s. We get in the teens. We draft his replacement. Then we draft another need at 31. And that's how we kind of reshape our football team to a certain degree. But another part of this, before I throw it back to you, you have a young quarterback in Brock Purdy who has a great continuity and camaraderie going with Brandon Aiyuk. You want to do everything that you can to surround him with the proper resources so that he can continue to be successful. Why would you take Aiyuk away from Brock Purdy? Which is also why we talk about moving on from Deebo Samuel next year, because that could make sense for this football team.
It's going to be interesting. I mean, some scouting buddy of mine told me last week, he's like, the 49ers just need to absolutely get as many receivers who excel in the middle of the field as possible, because that's really where Purdy, is outstanding. And he brought up, that the Niners could have interest in Brock Bowers if Bowers fell in the first round. How likely is it that Bowers falls? He's a blue chipper. He's a local kid. He's from Napa. I can see them looking at Bowers and saying, man, this guy, we could go double tight end with Kittle and Bowers. The wide receiver. We can replace Aiyuk in free agency with Tyler Boyd. We could take a shot in the, Christian McCaffrey saying, draft my brother, draft my brother, draft my brother. So they only have so many wide receiver spots if they're going to try to draft Luke McCaffrey in the 4th or 5th round. I'm just kind of throwing out ideas here because personally, I love Aiyuk and I want to pay him. But let's be totally real about this. For the money that he's going to command and for the production that he has had in their biggest games, he had 3 catches in each of the each of the, the Super Bowl and the 2 playoff games. Is he worth $35 million? I don't know on this team if he is. On a team that likes to spread it around, on a team where he's never really, how many 10 catch games does he have in his career? He only had 7 touchdowns all of last year. Is it possible that his contract is greater than his production for whatever reason? I think he's special, but if you told me that they were going to wait until draft day and see if Brock Bowers fell to, 15, 16, 17, I could see them making an aggressive play for Bowers. What do you think? How do you see Bowers' market on draft day?
Yeah, a couple of things there. Could we see this Niners offense evolve where they pay and extend Brandon Aiyuk and they run it back with the same entire offensive unit that was the number 1 overall offense in the NFL last year here in 2024? And then you have Aiyuk under that contract extension. You draft another wide receiver, whether it be Brendan Rice, who they've met with at the combine, bringing in for a 30 visit. You draft Luke McCaffrey to be your future slot wide receiver. And then in 2025, this time next year, they tried to trade Deebo Samuel away. And then that rookie that you drafted here in 2024 takes over in the slot. And he gets some of those opportunities that went to Deebo, but then you increase the role of Brandon Aiyuk, and he becomes your go-to 100 target per year wide receiver as the X. Maybe that's the change in evolution of this Niners offense that they're starting to put in motion now and think about now to implement for 2025. And then once that contract starts to settle in for Aiyuk a couple of years down the road, because I'm always kind of a fan of backloading some of those deals, putting some dummy years on it to absorb those cap hits, when that money starts to really hit, that's when Aiyuk is that 100 target per year boundary wide receiver who is a focal point of your offense. And then you have that young, cost-controlled, younger player who's in the slot, who, of course, is going to be a different player than the game changer and the game breaker that is Deebo Samuel. But Deebo's a weapon, and you can find weapons, whether it be a Brendan Rice, an Xavier Legette, a Malachi Corley, a Luke McCaffrey. You can find those types of players. And then on the Brock Bowers front, I think the team to watch here is the New York Jets at number 10. They don't have a tight end. They just lost CJ Uzomah to the Philadelphia Eagles. Aaron Rodgers has always liked having a tight end on their team. At the other wide receiver spots, they're in a good spot with players like Garrett Wilson. Their defense is straight up loaded. They don't need to draft defense at number 10. Brock Bowers would be drafting upon need for New York, but I think you can make the argument he'd be the best player available because I think he's a top 10 overall player in this draft class. If the Jets don't draft him at number 10, then you're starting to look at all of the offensive tackles starting to go off the board. You have to throw in some cornerbacks going off the board, edge rushers in a Dallas Turner, a Jared Verse, which then causes Brock Bowers to fall down the draft board. And if he's in the late teens, if he's there at, let's say, 22, 23, do the Niners say, okay, he's by far our best player available. We had him as the 10th best player in this draft class. Here he is at, let's say, number 23. George Kittle, fantastic player, starting to get a little bit older. We have to start planning financially for the post-Deebo days and the post-George Kittle days. And we have to get out ahead of those players maybe declining a little bit. Also, let's run some more 2 tight end sets. The Niners are clearly interested in targeting another tight end. They tried to poach Brock right away from the Detroit Lions with that offer sheet. The Lions matched. They've looked at other tight ends in free agency. You can't tell me Cam Latu with the drop issues and Braden Willis, who's more of a H-back special teams contributor and shorter, is going to be your backup tight end to Kittle. What if you have Kittle and Brock Bowers on this offense for the next year or two, and then Brock Bowers, being the generational tight end prospect that he is, takes over for Kittle once you decide to move on from him?
It sounds like crazy talk, right? Because they love Aiyuk, but you have to kind of stay ahead of this thing, almost like surfing a wave. If you're going to pay your quarterback $40 to $50 million, that's 50 times what he's made this year. That means at least 2 big contracts are going to have to go. You got to make that call. Who are those guys going to be? You don't have to move those contracts today, but you got to start preparing. And I would say, if you ask me, looking at the guys who make money, I mean, Juszczyk's an easy one, but he's kind of redone his deal, and he doesn't have a monster deal. To me, it's Kittle, and the receivers are the guys that may have to be changed out. So if you could trade Aiyuk for a mid first round pick and take Brock Bowers, let's just say he gets by the Jets and he's sitting there, and he may, because I'm hearing the quarterbacks may push up, and that there's so many teams who want wide receivers, so many teams who want offensive linemen, that Bowers as a tight end could slip a little bit. I think he's a top 5 talent, to be honest. But
yeah,
if you could trade Aiyuk, turn Aiyuk into Bowers, and then take a wide receiver at 31 to replace Aiyuk, you could save all that money and really set yourself up for kind of the next era of 49er football with Brock Purdy. That being said, what receiver do you think they would be interested in at 31? I mean, Harrison, Neighbors, Adunze, Brian Thomas, probably Troy Franklin, probably are all gone at that point. And you're looking at a board maybe of Ladd McConkey, who I'm not a huge fan of, Adonai Mitchell, who I really do like. I think he's a monster. Xavier Worthy, who ran 4.21. Keon Coleman, who's got a monster catch radius. Xavier Legette, who looks a lot like A.J. Brown to me. And then there's a few others. Roman Wilson ran in the 4.3s. He's productive. Ricky Pearsall is a tremendous receiver from Florida. And they sent a huge contingent, the Niners did, to Western Kentucky to meet with Malachi Corley. What do you think? If the Niners are going a trade of Aiyuk, turning Aiyuk into Bowers, and trying to get a wide receiver to replace Aiyuk, who do you think they would target? Or who do you think's who's a fit for them there? Or who do you like?
Yeah, to your previous point too, I love talking team strategy. I know you do as well, and this is why sometimes we're out in front of these things. Talking about moving on from veterans, on my show, on your show, we were talking about moving on from Arik Armstead, or one key veteran that the Niners were going to move on from. People are saying, they're not going to do that, just run it back. They moved on from Arik Armstead. Next offseason, the offseason after that, they're going to start to run into a very similar issue where they're going to have to emotionally move on from a veteran who's meant a lot to their football team. And let me throw this out there as well before we get back to the wide receivers. Your defensive back situation right now is extremely precarious. Charvarius Ward, Diamador Lenore, Isaac Yadam, Ambry Thomas, Rock Ya-Sin, all in the final years of their contract. So if you want to run it back with Charvarius Ward and extend him, and Diamador Lenore, and you want to extend him, and if you really like those players, knowing that cornerback is a very important position, Talanoa Hufanga, another free agent. Do you want to pay those players? Well, if you want to pay those players, you might have to move on from a George Kittle, a Kyle Juszczyk, a Deebo Samuel. That's why we have these types of conversations here. And I think down the road, it's going to make a lot of sense. And we're going to have this conversation about a year from now, 10 months from now. As far as the wide receivers go, at 31, I think the Niners are in a good spot where they put themselves in a position with what they've done in free agency in really bulking up their depth, reshaping their defensive line, getting a Leonard Floyd. And the depth pieces are really on both sides of the ball. I like what they've done as far as bulking the depth, where they can go a couple of different routes at number 31. I think you can get a Zach Frazier, a Jackson Powers Johnson, a really good offensive tackle, a Kingsley Suamataia, one of the freaks in Amarius Mims, Tyler Guyton, if they fall. You could go Patrick Paul. You could go Jordan Morgan. You could go with a bunch of offensive linemen at 31. And then at 63, you still go with the really good wide receiver. Or if you go wide receiver at 31, you can get a really solid offensive lineman in a deep offensive line class with that second round selection. At 31, it kind of depends on what you're looking for, right? Do you want an outside wide receiver like a Brandon Aiyuk, or do you want a slot wide receiver? If you want a slot, Ricky Pearsall, Ladd McConkey, they're going to be the options that you look at operating out of the slot. Do you want a slot later? Then you look at a player like Luke McCaffrey. If you want a Deebo Samuel clone, you probably go the route of Malachi Corley. If you want a built physical wide receiver who can play outside, inside, you probably go Xavier Legette. If you want a vertical burner who ran a 4.21 40-yard dash but is sub 170 pounds, you go with Xavier Worthy. If you want another slot in the second round, you might have to move up to take him, but Roman Wilson out of Michigan, I think, would be a solid option. So it all comes down to what you want as far as the prototype of that wide receiver. Do you want somebody to operate on the inside, knowing they might take over for Debo in 2025? If you trade away Aiyuk, you need to replace that boundary option.
I kind of like Legette from South Carolina. I just feel like when I watch him, I see a guy who separates, and then I see a guy who runs away. He's got the rack that they're used to. He's got the size and the strength. I know he's only a 1-year production guy, but it was in the SEC, and to me, he looks legit. I got a lot of concerns about some of the other receivers. I mean, just across the board, Worthy a track guy who we were falling in love at the combine because he wasn't their best receiver.
He had drop Mitchell at Texas too.
Yeah, and Mitchell, I think, is a far better receiver, and he also runs incredibly well. McConkey didn't score very many touchdowns. Roman Wilson doesn't break a lot of tackles. As far as he's not a guy that will catch it in the crowd and get knocked around and still keep his feet. He gets knocked down. How physical is Pearsall? He was awesome in the SEC, but to me, I'm a little concerned about his durability. Keon Coleman's got a great catch radius, but there's some questions there. I think there's going to be an adjustment period there.
40-yard dash is brutal.
Yeah, and Kyle loves separation.
Yeah.
Corley I like, but I think he's more of a poor man's Debo than Debo, to be completely honest. Devontae Walker's big and strong, but he's got a lot of drops in his profile.
I feel like that could be a Danny Gray type of speed third-round pick. I want more of a sure thing.
I mean, one of the more sure thing receivers, I think, is the tiny kid from Virginia, Malik Washington. He did it at Northwestern. He did it in the ACC at Virginia, but he's 5'8".
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Do you want to replace a 6, Aiyuk 6'1", but he really plays like 6'4" because of the long arms. You want to replace a 6'3", 6'4" receiver with a 5'8" receiver? Is that really going to help Brock Purdy? So there's a lot of questions here. And then, and then the other factor is, can you get Tyler Boyd? Because Tyler Boyd does have great ball skills and can operate in the slot and could help them. He might make a bigger impact than any of these rookies would make. So there's lots of questions there, but I think it's easy to sit in the chat and go, they're not moving Aiyuk, blah. Okay, fine, tough guy. Go find me, $50 million of cap savings on the team and make it make sense and figure that out. Because to me, that's, anybody can say they're not moving a star, but it's hard to come up with $50 million of savings. And I realize the cap's going up, so on and so forth, but it ain't going up that much. And they're going to have to make an offletting. They're going to have to, somebody's going to have to be moved off this roster. Maybe not right now. Maybe next year. And I don't love the idea of making him play on the 5th year, deal either, because I don't want an unhappy guy. I don't want a guy stewing at his locker all year. You didn't take care of me. And this whole backdrop and subplot of you didn't pay Aiyuk and why didn't you? And you paid this guy and that guy and Debo versus Aiyuk. I don't think that's a positive for the Niners to have that going on. Here's the other question. Is the Niner D-line right now, Chase, better than the D-line that they had on Super Bowl Sunday?
Man, I've thought a lot about this defensive line. They've completely remade it. You still have Nick Bosa, who I thought was very good in 2023. He obviously wasn't the Defensive Player of the Year player that he was in 2022. I think a big reason for that, him getting off to a slow start, not signing that deal until right up until the brim of the regular season opener. It took him a little while to get going, but he brought it midway point of the year toward the playoffs, and he ended his playoff sack drought. I thought he was impactful in the Super Bowl too. He's a dog. He's about the right things. The Niners love him as a player. There's a reason why he addresses the team every Saturday night before the game. I love what he's about. And I think he's due for like a rebound season closer to the form of that Defensive Player of the Year campaign that we saw 2 years ago. Leonard Floyd is probably an upgrade over Chase Young. He's been very durable, more than 100 straight starts. He's one of 4 players in the NFL to have 9+ sacks, or one of 3 players in the NFL, in addition to Hassan Reddick and Myles Garrett, to have 9+ sacks each of the last 4 years. He's probably better against the run, has good bend, he can set the edge, a hustle player, but I'm not sure he's an every down defensive end. And then after that, you have Yetur Gross-Matos, who up to this point has been a miss for the Carolina Panthers, has a lot of potential. Could he be an Arden Key player? You're banking on Chris Kocurek doing with Yetur Gross-Matos what he did with Arden Key, Charles Omenihu, and Cleveland Ferrell, which that's why Chris Kocerek's one of the best defensive line coach in the NFL. And then you have Malik Cunningham, who the last 2 years has been the more productive and more available player than Eric Armstead, but his ceiling probably isn't what Armstead's is. Can you get a rebound season from Javon Hargrave? He still gave you 7 sacks. I thought he brought it in the Super Bowl as well, but he's on the wrong side of 30. So it's a different looking defensive line. I almost think it's just neutral. Maybe you upgrade from Chase Young to Leonard Floyd, but I do have age concerns, even though he's been durable and productive. But at one point, is that going to run out? You lose Eric Armstead, who is a good two-way player, but would you rather have Malik Cunningham, who's been more available, more productive, and is half the price? I probably would at this point, given the roster construction for this team. I think they need defensive tackle depth. You have Kevin Givens, you have Kalia Davis. It wouldn't surprise me if the Niners go D-tackle in the first couple of rounds. You and I have talked about that. So I'd say maybe slightly better, but kind of neutral. It's a different looking defensive line that's maybe better against the run, which maybe that's the improvement that they needed.
At the end of the first round, I mean, it's funny. So many Niner fans, it's like, we've talked about so many different positions, but they always seem like they go D-line. And why do they go D-line? Because that's where they really feel like, the game is impacted. I'm not sure if I would agree with that as time has gone on. 3-step drops, quarterbacks can neutralize a real good rush. But would you rather go for, the 6th or 8th best tackle or the best offensive tackle, or would you rather go for the best defensive tackle? I was talking to Baldy about this the other day, and I'm like, who's, of all those inside guys, I like Rukaroro. I like Michael Hall, who led the nation, I believe, in pass rush win rate from the inside. I like Aroro's workouts and his potential and upside. It's a little bit of a risk, but I think he's a crazy athlete. He might be the best prospect 3 years from now of this group. And then there's Byron Murphy, there's Braden Fisk, there's Mason Smith. He said he likes Johnny Newton from Illinois. What do you think? Do you like Johnny Newton? Could you see the Niners going Johnny Newton at 31? Some people think he's going to go 15, 16, 17. But if he's there at 31 and he is the top interior 3 technique on the board or on a lot of boards, he's only 6'2". There's not a lot of room to put on any extra pounds. But he is quick off the snap, man, and he's a hell of a player. Would you go Johnny Newton or Byron Murphy, those top tackles, defensive tackles over the 6th, 7th, 8th, or 9th rated offensive tackle?
Yeah, and just so people don't get confused, Johnny Newton is also Jerzon Newton. He goes by both. So some people are probably like, wait, is that his teammate? It's the same guy, actually. It's such an interesting conversation because, obviously the most pressing need for the Niners is offensive tackle and offensive guard. And I think that you can get really good players there. Do you go offensive tackle or offensive guard, maybe even center? Your boy Zach Frazier, Jackson Powers Johnson, Graham Barton, if he falls. Do you go with offensive line? Let's just call it offensive line 31. And then you're banking on maybe a defensive tackle falling to you in the second round. Could it be a Chris Jenkins out of Michigan, who I really like? Good against the pass, good against the run. Could it be a Rukaroro, who maybe falls, but I'm not sure he does just because of the upside that he has? Or do you go with one of those underrated players who could fall but at that point, it's probably a little bit of a reach. I'd probably go offensive line at 31 if you don't trade away Aiyuk, and then see what the board is in the second round. Because if Mike Sainristil still is there with that second round pick, I might go with him to be your slot corner. I think he's the best slot corner in this draft. Or could a Rukaroro fall? A Chris Jenkins, I would love that pick too.
Brandon Dorlus is a guy from Oregon that's been, mocked to them in a number of fronts. 6'3", 285, can play, defensive end, but he also has the ability to kind of play inside on pass rushing downs. What do you think of Dorlus? Could you see him being the pick at 31?
I think Kent makes a good point. You trade back, you get draft capital, and then you get both in the second round. So the Niners right now are at 31. Let's say you trade back to 35, right? And then you're picking at 35. Do you get a pick by trading back in the 40-50 range? And then you have your own pick, and I think it's 63. Somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's right. The pick, 63. Then you're looking at a situation where you get your offensive lineman in the 30s, 40s or 50s, you can go defensive tackle. And then at 63, you have your option of slot corner, you have your option of edge, you have your option of defensive tackle. I am never against a trade back if it makes sense for you, if the value is there. And if you do that and you get a couple of second round picks there, you can address multiple areas of weakness, which strategically I think is really smart for San Francisco, and you can get some really quality players in those draft slots.
My buddy who's huge on all these rumors, and I'm like, he's independently wealthy and he's just sitting around just playing golf and doing nothing and talking Niners. Yeah. And he was like reading into the Aiyuk IG thing, is saying that he thinks he wants to go to the Browns, or that he was referencing the Browns. And he said, would you trade Aiyuk to the Browns if you could get Greg Newsome, JOK, and a pick? And I was like, whoa, wait a second. I got to think about that, because Newsome would really help their corners.
Yeah.
I am the biggest JOK fan, and there's no question he's awesome. I mean, anybody who saw the Browns check out in the playoffs, he single-handedly dominated that game.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, John Lynch played with Derek Brooks. In a lot of ways, JOK reminds me of a modern-day Derek Brooks. Does Lynch see the same thing? Would you make that trade? Would you trade Aiyuk if you could get Newsome, JOK, and a pick? And their pick, they don't have a first-round pick. I think they're picking in the second rounds in the late 40s or 50s.
Yeah, I like JOK coming out. It took him a little while to get going. It's good to see him finally developing. I think Jim Schwartz really helped bring the best out of him last year. Greg Newsome is an interesting player because he was a late first-round pick out of Northwestern, and he had 14 pass breakups last year. He graded out okay per Pro Football Focus. He's really been Jekyll and Hyde. With an Aiyuk trade, I really want to get a sure thing. And while JOK is a really good player, Greg Newsome, a little bit of an unknown, and you're still going to have to give him a contract extension to make that deal worth it. So he's not going to be as expensive as Brandon Aiyuk, but you're still going to have to pay him. And then JOK is getting to a point where you might have to pay him as well. You get that affordable second-round pick. I think that's a deal that I would probably pass on.
Only a few more minutes. Chase Sr. in the house doing our Friday deal, and we love having him on. Okay. Your pick, if you're picking for the Niners, I want two names here. I want who you would pick at 31, and obviously we don't know who's available, so you can draw the board up any way you want. Your pick at 31, and if you had to bet every dollar you had on their pick at 31.
Yeah, my dream scenario is if Graham Barton falls, and you can take him to be your center over Jake Brendel. He can play guard. I think his arms are a little bit too short to play tackle. I think he's going to be a perennial Pro Bowler in this league. So I think that's a player that I'd love to see drop. If Amarius Mims or Tyler Guyton fell, even to like 27, do you try to trade up, or do they fall to 31? I think that could be an option. I think the player they do take is Jordan Morgan out of Arizona. He does have some injury issues, but played at a really high level at left tackle for Arizona. You put him on the inside, I think he could be a really good player. The Niners could trade up for a player like Troy Fuatanu out of Washington. Played tackle, probably a guard at the next level because sometimes he struggles with getting beat on those inside moves. That's why you put him on the interior. So those are kind of the players and the contingent of guys that I think are on the Niners' radar here. It all depends on how the board falls.
I think they need, whether, we can talk about O-line, D-line, this, that, tackle, center, guard. I think they need a great player. It doesn't matter to me if it's a great center, a great guard, a great tackle, a great defensive tackle, a great defensive end. They need a great player. So I'm gonna say that I would, if it was me, I'm going West Virginia center Zach Frazier because I think he's a great player. If you say make your guess on what they do, I'm gonna go Darius Robinson from Missouri. I just think that they're big on the Senior Bowl. He was the practice player of the week at the Senior Bowl. There's just a lot to like with Darius Robinson. I think
they do like Senior Bowl players too.
And they're showing interest maybe in this Oregon kid who in a lot of ways, Dorless is in a lot of ways, Darius Robinson is a very similar player, a guy that can be lined up inside and you can play games. You can, line him up, in an all pass rusher formation inside. You can play him opposite Bosa potentially. I would say if I'm betting on what they'll do, I'll take Darius Robinson. If it's my pick, I'm going Zach Frazier. What do you think of Rock Ya-Sin in that addition? I mean, you saw him in Baltimore. He's moved around. He's had some injuries. I just don't know what he's got left physically. It seems like, he's always been a little dinged up. He was a prototypical player. He's played at, at Temple in his final couple of years. You saw him there in Philly. What's your thoughts on Rock Ya-Sin and the signing to bring him here?
Yeah. No, by the way, another dream option, Chop Robinson if he falls. And if he's there at like 26, 27, I'd like to trade up for him. Honestly, Larry, cornerback, I think, could happen too. Like, what if Kool-Aid McKinstry falls to number 31? Cooper DeJean falls to 31. I think those could be options as well.
Could they reach for Max Melton from Rutgers, who's been awesome? He's got good film, and he had a great pre-draft.
Yeah, that would definitely be a reach, but he's met with the Niners several times, does not have a 30 visit set with San Francisco, but he grew up in New Jersey as a diehard Niner fan. He talked about that at the NFL Combine. Rock Ya-Sin, I'm very familiar with him. I actually went to Temple University too. I got to see that program really flourish under Matt Rule. He was not there under Matt Rule. He was there after in, I believe, 2019. He had some really good reps and a good competition with Deebo Samuel at the Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. Deebo Samuel's a fierce competitor, has that dog mentality. Rock Ya-Sin does as well. That swagger, that confidence, that short memory, that's something that you need at that cornerback spot. He actually was a 2-time state wrestling champion in Georgia and went to Presbyterian College at the FCS level coming out of school and then transferred to Temple as a grad student. So slept on as a football player coming out of high school, then really slept on as a grad student as well, because it's not like he went to a Power 5 program. He went to Temple University. He played well there. And Temple University has this tradition where the players that best exemplify what Temple is about as a program, toughness, swagger, that Philadelphia mentality, the diamond in the rough type of player, their practice facilities on 10th and Diamond, they give them single digits. So it's a huge honor for these players to get these single digits. Rock Ya-Sin got a single digit and is long, really good athlete. Scouts absolutely loved his body frame coming out of school because of the long arms, ability to jam, good athlete, ran a 4.5 40 pre-draft process. Not great by any means, but the Colts saw a player with a lot of upside who needed some development. They drafted him in the second round. He was a Pro Football Focus all-rookie guy in his rookie year. He hasn't been able to really maintain that development since then. And he's always had these nagging injuries, which I think have stopped him on the runway of truly finding his footing in his developmental process to be a solid player. So if he can stay healthy, we've seen the Niners do a good job of developing corners. Maybe they get a good bang for their buck type of signing here. I will say this. I like what the Niners have done, just building up their depth on their football team. Last year, they were maybe a little bit top heavy. Now they've found these value signings and good backups. I think Isaac Yiadom, who's a Pro Football Focus darling as far as the analytical numbers, he filled in for Marshawn Lattimore last year, was very highly graded as a cornerback, could end up being the diamond in the rough type of acquisition for the Niners. So too could Rock Ya-Sin. At the very least, you have some Ambry Thomas insurance here if you don't go corner in the draft, because clearly they've lost confidence in him.
We'll finish on a fun note. I'm going to share the screen. My man Raj has the latest commercial starring Brock Purdy and Colton McKivitz for John Deere. I don't know if you saw this.
Thanks, Brock.
Well, hold on. Here we go.
Going on a road trip. Gonna need some onion dip.
That's beautiful, man. Thanks, Brock.
I need to know what this road trip is.
Go.
I need to know. Where are they going? It's a John Deere ad. Is it just they're going to be on a tractor, or are they traveling somewhere and they're going to document this thing?
I don't know, but it's just the Colton McKivitz and, John Deere getting Colton McKivitz and Brock Purdy together. What do you got cooking the rest of your day?
On that road trip, is Brock going to say, don't give up 47 pressures in 2024, Colton, please?
It's going to be like your road trip. Remember we had you in the car on the way to Houston?
National title.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
At this point of the year,
road trips are awesome, man. I mean, let's be honest. Everybody needs a good road trip or two.
I agree. I'm at a point right now where once I get past the NFL draft and the grind of that, I kind of just want to hit the open road. And some people are calling me crazy, but I live in Dallas right now, and I have family in Nashville. My dad lives there. My stepdad lives in Florida. I kind of want to do like a Dallas to New Orleans, stay there, listen to some really good music, eat some good food, then drive to Florida, then on my way back up to Nashville and back. And people are like, that's a lot of hours on the road. It would be a hell of a long road trip, but I kind of want to do it to just hit the road, man, and kind of reset a little bit.
I've done that, man. I flew into Atlanta. I was doing a radio deal, and we went from Atlanta, or we finished in Atlanta. We flew into New Orleans. We went to Baton Rouge, Lake Charles, Beaumont, Houston, Austin, Dallas, Shreveport, Memphis, Nashville, Little Rock, maybe Little Rock.
That's in the range. Yeah.
And then we went to Birmingham, and then out to Atlanta.
Damn,
it is a lot of driving, but at least the one thing is there'll be no snow. There'll be no snow on the road.
Summer of 2014, I drove from Philly to Los Angeles and spent the summer out in LA. I've never been to the Bay Area, actually, so maybe I should just drive out there. We can get some pig in the pickle barbecue, take down some beers, and talk some Niner football. I don't know. That could be an option too.
Sounds good. I am on the radio later today on 95.7 The Game. Catch me from 2 to 6 with, I think, the great Dan Dibley. And we'll be talking Warriors. We'll be talking Warriors, and we'll be talking Warriors. Oh, no, hopefully we'll mix in something else. But will be a lot of Warrior talk today. What do you got cooking the rest of the day?
Man, I'm going to go for a run here, get a good workout in. It's a beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky. Temperatures are great, especially this time of year. So I'm going to do that. And then this time of year, a lot of draft content to come throughout the weekend on the Niners Report.
Yeah, man, I admire all the videos. You got your hustling, you're putting out content, and Niner fans, I'm sure, are appreciative. Chase, have a great day, man. Always good to rock and roll with you on a Friday. We'll do it again next week.
You as well. Have a good weekend.
Everybody, thanks. Pig in a Pickle. Thanks to all of our sponsors. Thanks to all of you guys. Peace.
Yeah, never met a man I've been scared of. Careful, you won't get exactly what you asked for. Careful, whatever you bring me getting handled. I answer the